Starting off for today will be 842, 842. For those at home, A Common Love. A common love for each other, a common gift to the Savior, a common bond holding us to the Lord, a common strength when we're weary, a common hope for tomorrow, a common joy in the truth of God's word. And then went with two good songs. Next song for those following along in book, 937, 937. For those at home, I stand in awe. This will be, I believe, the song before classes. Are we supposed to do prayer? Yes. Okay. Since this is the song before classes, should we go ahead and do the opening prayer for everything?
Let us pray. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you so much, Father, for this beautiful day, for all our friends and loved ones that are here. And we ask you to take care of the ones that are sick and absent at this time and help them in any way they can. Father, be with us as we go through this study and help us take the things we taught here today and spread it through the world so other people can know how great thou art. Lord, forgive us our sins and be with us. Travel forward for these things we ask in Jesus' name.
Now we shall sing the song. It's always the prayers and then also the please be seated that gets me almost every time without fail. Almost every time. You are beautiful beyond description, too marvelous for words, too wonderful for comprehension, like nothing ever seen or heard. Who can grasp your infinite wisdom? Who can fathom the depths of your love? You are beautiful beyond description, majesty enthroned above. And I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holy God, to whom all praise is due, I stand in awe of you. That'll be released to our classes.
I know sometimes we repeat. If there's ever a time you want to repeat on something like that, just flash the sign, I'll rotate again. Hopefully you won't have to throw anything at me. I'll try and pay attention.
Whenever I repeat something, it's like especially with the Woman song, it's not too much tied song. It's like a specific part of the song.
Right.
Whenever I do When No One Stands Alone, and then I get to there, and then it's like,
Yeah.
I get to the very end, and then I just go to like the bare middle of the song, where it picks up the tempo. So.
Gotcha.
So if I ever plan to repeat it, I'll have to discuss it beforehand.
No worries. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Again, it's good to see everyone here, and encourage you to open your Bibles up to Revelation chapter 12. We're going to be jumping back in just a moment. Revelation chapter 12. We'll mention him again at the hour, but did want to mention Danny will not be able to be with us this morning. One of the other caretakers that sits with Caleb, Randall, He was having some trouble this morning, a little bit of dizziness, so they were getting him checked out. So Danny's going to be with Caleb this morning, but he called to let us know so that we wouldn't miss him there. But Revelation chapter 12 is where we're at. We were getting into this great scene with the red dragon, and we talked about, of course, the fact that the dragon here is simply a symbol of the adversary, and the war that we see here is simply talking about the battle between Christians to maintain their faith in the face of the adversity. A lot of these things, again, have a much more straightforward and simple application than sometimes we want to put with that. And I understand, it is interesting to think about a great war in heaven. It is interesting to think about things in this dramatic way. But again, ultimately, the Word of God exists not to entertain, but rather to instruct. And the instruction that it gives us is one of confidence and one of reassurance, of faith in God, and as well awareness of the battle that stands before us, but also the strength that we have to war it. And so all these things continue to be images that we see. We had talked about the child that was born, referring to Jesus there as our strength, as the one who's prophesied to come. I think the last little bit there is where we didn't get to speak as much. So I want to pick up about verse 6, and I want to make sure. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Is 6 about where we'd stopped? Is that right? Or did I move my mark? I always like to double check myself, because when you do context study, sometimes you can lose your mark getting the context. So 6 correct. Everyone's marking a 10.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought, but again, I like to double check myself, especially after a busy day. So I did want to look at 6 because we didn't talk about the woman fleeing into the wilderness. So backing up just a little bit here, getting another symbol that we talked about there, we said that in one way at least, the woman here who gives birth to the child is what, or refers to whom?
Mary.
All right, in one way it refers to Mary as the mother of Christ, but in another way, how do we see this child that belongs to the woman who is going to flee in the wilderness for an indefinite period of time? Mary doesn't flee into the wilderness for an indefinite period of time. And that's okay. Again, there is a way in which that connects and works. So you're not wrong with that. But there's another way that does fit better here and speaks to them where they are. What, not literal woman, but representative item is sometimes referred to in a feminine way.
Eve.
All right, Eve is, but that's not what we're looking at here.
Israel.
All right, we talked about Israel and how that would work. But again, Israel only got us up to Christ. If we wanted to interpret this as Israel, the fleeing into the wilderness would be being lost, because Israel as a nation is not really...
Talking about the Jewish nation.
Well, again, that is one way that we could look at it, but the problem with that becomes, what does that have to do with the Christians now?
Church.
The church,
yeah.
as the bride of Christ.
Oh, man.
And that's okay, like I said.
Did I not mention that last week?
I think you
I I
did, but I wanted to make sure everybody remembered and caught up, because,
Yesterday was a long day for me.
oh, believe me, I understand, and you guys worked super hard. This is something that can have multiple things that are allusions to. So again, all that you talked about, whether it's Israel, which is something we mentioned last week, or Mary, those both work because that is part of that path as well. But ultimately, the path here is looking forward. It's looking to what happens after the child is born. And the mother in that sense is the church. Now, the church fleeing into the wilderness and being nourished, well, again, that's us living in this world between the time that Christ established that church and when he comes to bring us home to be with him forevermore in eternity. We are now in the wilderness. We are now in a place that is strange. It is not our home. It is not where we are intended to live forever. And again, trying to use the parallels that the Bible gives us that the people of the first century would also be able to relate to. That whole Israel thing, they understood the idea of being between a place which was not your home and was uncomfortable and you were enslaved, and a place which is your home and you're working towards, and that journey in between, a literal wilderness where they traveled through the desert to get to the promised land. It was a hard time there. Not everyone made it because not everyone remained faithful. But if we remain faithful unto death, then we will reach that promised land. We will reach that place of rest, just as some of Israel did. And God nourishes us. He feeds us through His Word and provides for us those things that are needed so that we can endure. Not only do we have everything that we need for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, but we have everything that we need to be thoroughly furnished unto every good work. That's what 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 tells us. And so God certainly nourishes His church and provides for them everything we need to endure this time in the world, and not only to endure it, but to prosper in it, to be well taken care of. And God certainly knows how to take care of those that He loves. All right, before I get into 7 and following and talk a little bit more about that, context questions, anything that we need to say a little bit more about in the first 6 before I move into new stuff? Yes?
I have kept notes.
Oh, wonderful.
And I've got, the 203 score days.
Okay.
It's 3.5 years. There's that 3.5
Yes. And again, you'll notice whether it's rendered 1260 days or 3.5 years, all of those things, it is this indefinite period of time. It's not meant to be something where you're looking for a specific, there's a significance to that, like 7 days. Well, is that perfection? Is that completeness? You're not looking for something deeper. This is just a while. And that's a way for them to communicate that. We see that quite frequently. Excellent point, excellent observation. Other things. All right, let's go ahead and read 7 to the end again to keep that in front of us, and then we're going to break that apart a bit. So Revelation 12, beginning of verse 7, it says, "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of His Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given to the two wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she was to be nourished for a time and times and a half. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he stood on the sand of the sea. I'm going to pause there, and that last actually transitions into 13, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So let's back up. All right, again, this idea of this great war in heaven is something that captures our imagination. It sounds like something tremendous to see, and so it definitely piques our curiosity. But I think we mentioned this last week, and if not, we'll mention it here again. The problem with this, amongst other problems, is the way heaven is described to us by God and the Bible is a place of security, a place that is unassailable by the forces of evil and darkness. That is part of the reassurance that we are given in heaven. Now, if this is a literal siege against heaven, then that kind of doesn't harmonize very well with what God has said heaven is. And so I would suggest to you, based on that, this is not talking about a literal siege of heaven by Satan and those who are in agreement with him. We're not seeing the event that caused the devil to be thrown down in the first place. As much as we might like to know about that, it's just not really detailed why it is that Satan fell. But we can understand this, and we can find something here that continues the thought that we have began at the beginning of this chapter and continues to impress upon us things, as it did children in the first century, that help them to strengthen their faith. So, in what way has there been a great spiritual battle between the adversary and between God and his plan? Where is perhaps the greatest example we see of the adversary marshaling his forces to try and undo the will of God, the plan of God, in the most overt and the most powerful way?
In the Garden of Eden.
So the garden is definitely a place where we see that sets everything into motion. And again, that could work, but the problem then becomes, but what does that mean for the first century Christians? If we're alluding to that, it could just be talking about sin in general, but is there another event, maybe something closer, that could give another reference that's going to fit with this even better?
I mean, it's not in the Bible.
Well, that is in the Bible, yes. No, that is in the Bible.
Is it when Jesus was up on the mountain and the devil was after him and trying to kill him?
That's a part of it. That's a part of that war. It is the war to try and disrupt God's plan to redeem man. The garden started the fall. Jesus on the cross redeemed us from the fall. And so the adversary did everything he could to try and prevent Jesus from being successful in his mission, because that was the ultimate plan of God. God knew that mankind at some point would disobey and eat of the fruit. Because in giving humanity free will, again, it's an inevitability. At some point, someone is going to make that choice because they're going to choose to exercise their free will in the worst sort of way. Jesus comes to redeem us, to restore us, and the adversary knows if that happens, if God and man are reconciled and there is nothing between them any longer, then he's lost his leverage. He's lost his power. You see, think about it. For the adversary to win before Christ, all he really needed to do was to wait for you to sin. Because once you sinned, your relationship with God is now separated. It's different. There's always something between you and God that you cannot get rid of. And even if God overlooks that, and we understand this, it's not always so easy for us to overlook that, is it? It's not always so easy for us to let go of the sins that we have committed and the things that we have done that we're not proud of. Sometimes those things impact not only our choices, but the way that we interact with those that we love. You know? Think about when you were a small child and maybe you told a fib. And maybe mom and dad didn't know right away, but if you're anything like me, every time you'd see them, you couldn't help but kind of hang your head. Because in your heart, you knew that you had done something wrong. You had told them something that wasn't true, and it was hard to look at them because you knew, and you couldn't help but wonder, do they know? Do they know that I told them a lie? Or are they just being nice to me in spite of that? Or are they waiting? You know, you get all these things in your head. It builds and it makes it so much worse than it really is. Knowing that there's that something between you and God that you cannot get rid of, that has a way of wearing at a person. And the devil really only had to allow that to happen to let humanity be human. And then there's that leverage point that anytime we start feeling good about ourselves, anytime we start making progress, anytime we start being strong and productive, all he has to say is, but remember. Have you forgotten when? Didn't you do this just the other day? Didn't you say this just the other day? And can you deny that? Not without adding another sin to your list, can you? So then, now we're caught betwixt a problem. I know that I have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but I want to walk with God. But how can I walk with God when I know that I've done this that violates His will, that offends Him, that disrespects Him? How can I walk in His presence when I know that I have this that I'm carrying with me? The adversary lost a great tool in his work against us when Jesus dies on the cross. Because through Jesus Christ, we have forgiveness of that sin. We can put the burden down and carry it no longer. When we stand in God's presence and the adversary says, do you remember when? Now we can say, yes, but have you forgotten the cross? Have you forgotten what Jesus Christ has given us in baptism as a means of redemption from those sins so that we can walk with Him cleansed of all those things? Now where's His power? Now where's His leverage? Now how can He shame us into withdrawing from God? How can He shame us into not using our power to glorify Him and to serve Him? It becomes a lot harder, doesn't it? And so when we look at this, in the cross we see this great battle between the adversary and his servants and God and His plan. And we're reminded about that. And we're reminded that God again wins the battle. That in spite of the forces that are coming against them, God wins. The deceiver is thrown down. Now, that's not exactly what Genesis said in describing the cross. But ultimately it's the same, isn't it? Having your head stepped on is a sign of defeat, just like being thrown down. The adversary is defeated in his plan. God overcomes. And now that Jesus has made this way, the devil knows time is short. The devil knows that there is only going to be so much more time before he receives his eternal punishment. And so he is working hard to try and steer us away from God while he can. And he's going to be very determined to do it because he understands the urgency of the matter. I didn't understand urgency really until I was a teenager. We were in the hayfields, and you ever seen a wall cloud of rain moving at you? It's not what you want to see when you're in the hayfields. Because once that hay gets wet, you can dry it out, but there's a good chance it's going to mold, and then you got to worry about the cows eating the mold. It's just a whole mess. So when that wall cloud of rain starts moving across the field, you get urgent. You start moving a little faster because every bale of hay that you save is a bale of hay that now the cows can use, and you don't have to worry about them getting sick. You don't have to worry about problems arising from that. You don't have to worry about it getting hot later and catching on fire and maybe burning your fields down. There's so many things you avoid by doing that. So, buddy, we were moving some hay all of a sudden. I mean, my sister's driving the truck, which is a terrifying thought by itself because she's 4 years younger than me. She's driving the truck and we're on the back. I'm the stacker, so I'm jumping up, grabbing one, jumping on, stacking it up. I'm up and down off the truck. Mom and Dad are throwing hay as fast as they can. It's a whole thing that urgency became something I had a reference point for in that moment. Because that rain was moving steady. It was coming closer and closer. And it didn't stop to tie its shoe. It didn't stop to think about if it wanted to give us another minute. It just kept moving at us. It was inevitable. And that made me have to pick up my pace. Because I understood anything that I didn't get safely to the barn, well, might be lost. And we were not a big farm, but we were definitely not the kind of farm that you could afford to just be throwing away bales of hay. Too much time and work went into that. It saved too much money to have that there. Well, how much more precious are the souls that we labor for now? We as Christians are to have this sense of urgency because time is limited. Night is coming. There is a day of judgment before us, and we don't know when it's going to happen, but when it does, it's done. We need to keep that urgency in front of us because the adversary already does. He understands that time is short, and he is giving everything he has to tear down everything that God has tried to build up in us. Certainly we understand how we ought to be watchful for his wrath. We ought to be mindful of his tricks because he wants to continue to do damage to that kingdom. He can't destroy it, but he can hurt those who are in it and hope that they fall from the way. This is the warning that we see given in these verses that we've looked at. I'm going to pause for a second. We're going to pick up in 13 in just a second and continue on down through the rest of the chapter before I say too much more because I've talked a lot. Anything on 7 through 12 we want to spend a little more attention to. Oh, I do know one thing, but I see if you notice it too. Anything 7 through 12? One thing I meant to mention, and I almost overlooked, in verse 11, we do see a reminder there that they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. So there's that encouragement, that connection there back to Christ, reminding us of the victory that he wins there. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to you, to the earth and the sea, and the devil who's come down to you in great wrath because he knows his time is short. I did want to mention the blood there as the point of our conquering, because again, obviously it is by the blood of Christ that we are redeemed, and that's our big hint here on how to unpack and unlock the rest of that. That's all I really had there. I just meant to mention that in passing, and I did not, so wanted to be sure and look at it. Getting into the next section, the adversary pursuing the woman. Again, we said the woman might be representative of the church, so that we know the adversary works against the church to try and destroy it. It says in verse 14, but the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle. Now, anybody have any reference connection to that from something Old Testament that might help us understand this a bit? Anything about the 2 wings there?
In Exodus, eagle's wings saved something.
Okay.
I don't remember.
They're promised to be given the wings of eagles to overcome. That's true. That's one. There's another couple there that I want to make sure we notice. Daniel 7:25 is one that mentions something similar to that as well. But the one that came to mind first for me, and the one that, as a matter of fact, until I switched Bible covers, it was actually the verse on the front of my Bible cover before it wore out. Isaiah 40:31. There's a song we sing that's based on Isaiah 40:31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not faint. Isaiah prophesied, talking about those who walk with God, those who serve and seek him, as being blessed with wings like eagles to soar over the problems and the struggles that the adversary throws at us. Because what particular challenge in this passage did the adversary use to try and slow down the momentum of God's people? What is the obstacle he places before us from his mouth? Right now I'm just talking what it literally says, not necessarily what it means yet. What does it say literally the serpent cast out of his mouth to try and cause harm to the woman and her offspring?
Water out of the mouth, wasn't it?
All right. a great flood, a wall of water. If there's a flood, the safest place to be is where? Up above it. Whether it's up on a mountaintop, whether it's up on a roof, or whether it is on wings flying above. Now, the great thing about wings as a symbol of our ascension and our victory here, if you climb up on a housetop and the water rises taller than the house, are you safe? If you go up on a mountain and the water rises above the mountain, are you safe? But if you are above the water because you have wings, as long as there's air above you, you have a place you can go and be safe. No matter how much is thrown at you, you can soar above it and remain safe. That is the assurance that God gives to us as His people, is that whatever the adversary throws, even if it consumes all below us, even if it destroys everything that we see beneath, we can soar above and remain safe because God is our strength and He is the one who provides our victory. That's a message that's worth hanging on to, isn't it? That's something that is comforting. Now, another little layer to that, where is the most famous instance of a flood in the Bible, and maybe in the world for that matter?
The Great Flood.
The Great Flood in Noah's day. You ever notice how the adversary really has a thing for trying to imitate God and imitate the things that He does? But no matter how he tries to do that, he always seems to stumble in some way. Here he tries to use a flood, something that God said He would never use again to destroy the earth, to try and burden the church and the Christ. And yet, God's not bothered by that. He simply rises above. Even in His pale imitation of this great flood, He doesn't have the power, it doesn't have the fear, it doesn't have the majesty, because it's not from God. It is a pale imitation by a deceiver and an accuser who wants to trick us into believing that he is strong and mighty, when really he's simply scared and desperate. That's not to say he has no power, but his power is one that comes from desperation and fear, not from true power, not from genuine authority. And so we don't have to worry about that. It might be a bad example, but I'll use it because I think it illustrates well. You ever had a citation put on your windshield while you're visiting a college campus by a college officer? If you haven't, that's okay. But a lot of times, especially in colleges, I know there's one particular college that we're all very familiar with that's nearby, that there are certain spaces that are intended for certain groups of people, and sometimes that's labeled plainly, and sometimes that's kind of a thing that's known on campus. But if you're not on campus, you don't necessarily know what all the symbols and colors and signs mean, and so you park where it seems convenient. You don't try and take a space that's obviously labeled for someone. Like if it says handicapped, we avoid that. If it says dorm parent, we avoid that. But if it's just an open space and we're trying to go somewhere, a lot of times we might park, and you can occasionally get a citation for that. Because without the proper signage there, if they see that you're not supposed to be there, they will indicate that. Fun fact, do you have to pay those tickets? If you're not a student at the campus, you really don't, because they really don't have any authority there. Now, it is still courteous to do so because, you violated a rule even if it's unbeknownst to you. So again, probably polite to do that. But if you didn't pay that ticket, they can't chase you down and take you to court and, try and hold that to you because, well, again, as we said, in that case, you didn't know you were violating their rules. It's not like you went in and said, watch this, I'm going to park across 3 spaces. You're not going in with the intention of doing something that is unlawful. You parked in what seemed to be an open and viable space. Unbeknownst to you, there was a rule that said you can't park here right now. You can't be punished for that. It's a rule that you're not aware of. God makes his rules clear. God makes his expectations clear. There's no mystery in that. The adversary tries to scare us by using tactics that make him seem impressive and imposing, but ultimately he doesn't have the power that God has, and certainly not to do many of the things that he threatens to do. The last little bit there is very important. It's the message that we continue to see echoed in another way of saying it. He wants to make war on those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus Christ. The adversary wants to continue to war against those who are where they're supposed to be. And that's understandable. Why doesn't he war against the people who aren't where they're supposed to be?
He doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to. Why do you need to beat somebody that's already defeated? You don't. That's checked off the list. Let's move to a little bit tougher challenge here. Let's look at these who are not yet defeated. Those who are not yet overcome. Those are the ones we're going to work at now. So, again, we see an encouragement to Christians to hold fast to the path, to continue in the faith, even if the adversary himself is the one who is trying us. If we hold true to God, if we walk closely with him, we have nothing to fear. He has no power over us. And there's a comfort in that. Especially, remember the world of the first century. They are enduring persecution presently by political powers, by religious powers, by those within the church who sometimes have misunderstandings about how doctrines work and how things ought to be done. They are being assailed on multiple levels here to maintain the faith, and the faith is still less than 100 years old. You're talking second generation faith at most here, maybe third if they're very young. The church has not been around for a long time. You don't have generation after generation after generation of faithful Christians to look to. For example, you have the original generation that were taught by Paul and the apostles, and you have some who are their children, who are that next generation, and that's it. So, having these constant reassurances, seeing these constant things to tell them that the battle is already won, now they just have to continue to be faithful, that's a very hopeful message to leave behind, and very fitting for the last book of our Bible. Because isn't that kind of the same fight we're still fighting today? Isn't it kind of still the same struggle that we're seeing here in the 21st century? 2,000 years later, we are battling against an adversary that knows the time is short, that is seeking to tear down what he can tear down, to discourage what he can discourage, and we're surrounded by a world that, by and large, does not treat us well. Whether it is overtly or whether it is covertly, nonetheless, they do not treat us with the respect and with the honor, with the kindness, and with the appreciation that ought to be given to God's people as the church, as this body of believers that are walking in the way. And by the way, are we barring the doors and keeping this all to ourselves? No. We are an inclusive body. We want all those who are willing to obey to walk with us. Seems fairly inviting, and yet we know the resistance that comes with that. Other things in 13 to the end of the chapter, other than that last part of the last verse, which we're going to pick up with 13. Yes?
I have a question about
Sure.
the college you were talking about.
Okay.
Do they really make people pay if they didn't know they weren't supposed to park there?
Well, the thing is, and the reason why they do that, and I'm not being critical of them, they don't know if it's a visitor or if it's a student who's not bought the proper tags to show where they're supposed to be. They don't know that, and so rather than have to track that down, go and do a search and figure out, is this a student, is this a parent's car, they put the citation on there. And again, if you're a student, then you are liable to the citation because either you have not gotten the proper documentation showing that you are a student, which is a problem, or you have parked somewhere that you know you aren't supposed to park and maybe took the sign down so people wouldn't know that you're a student, and maybe you can get by with it that way. So they put the citation so that if you are a student, you are then liable for that because they document that license plate. They'll go back later and take a look at that. But if you are an adult coming in, no, you really don't have to pay that. Again, if you wanted to do that as a courtesy to help your conscience, some people, if you break the law, you want to make all things right, don't want to leave any room for any kind. Some people are like that, that's fine. But no, you really don't have to pay that. They're not going to come after you about that because, again, you didn't know. But they don't have time to track down everything that they need to know to figure out, is this a parent who didn't know or a student who's trying to pull one over or just, breaking the rules. So they tag it. If it matters to you, you pay it. If it doesn't matter to you, if it doesn't apply to you, you're okay. Well, and that's the thing. Rules end up happening because someone breaks the rules or because there becomes a problem because there's no rule. At one point, none of that stuff existed. And what was happening is you were having people who were visiting parking in spaces that were where people lived. So imagine pulling up in someone's driveway and you park in their carport, and then you get out and you go around and do your things, and then you come back and you pull out of their carport and go on your merry way. Well, that's not so bad unless what happens? Unless they pull up and need to park in their carport, right? Now they can block you in and they can park somewhere else. So. Oh, that's true. That's true. But again, being that many of the students live on certain campuses there, if you're bringing in your groceries and you have a parking lot for your dorm, but visitors have filled up the parking lot, you have to park half a mile down the road. You're going to carry your groceries a half mile down the road to get in there?
I didn't even have a car. They all have cars, 2 or 3 of them.
Well, that's true, but the student body by and large comes from out of state now. I mean, you still do have a large portion that is in state, but a lot of colleges, you get people coming from other places from far away, so the cars kind of become more necessary. All right, sorry, I'm total sidetrack there, total squirrel, but anywho, I do want to get just a bite of this because we've got a few minutes, and we'll go ahead and introduce. Chapter 12 wraps up with an introduction to this next vision that we're going to see. So here we see, he stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" All right, I'm going to pause there because, like I said, we're about out of time. Your homework for next week, it's not much. We talked about the fact that our adversary likes the imitation game. He likes to pretend to be like God. He likes to do things that God has done so that hopefully we make associations there. And these first 4 verses, see what things you notice that are examples of the adversary imitating God's work to try and gain glory by association, I guess you could say. And we'll pick up and talk more about that next week. Appreciate your comments and your questions.